Hey folks, nice to see you again. I'm Dustin Cormier. Welcome to How to Rock Astrology. This is a continuation of our series talking about the outer planets, defining their stability and conductivity. So we've just talked about auspicious yogas and the auspiciousness of the outer planet's house lord to the Lagna. We're going to be talking about dignity. You can see in our last class that Mercury, we're going to be talking about Charlie Sheen's chart, of course. You can see that Mercury is the fourth lord and the first lord, and it's in the third house. And we read the Bhava Yoga of the fourth lord in the third house. And that, of course, the fourth lord being in the third house, these outer planets, Pluto and Uranus, must transmit their fourth house agenda through the third house because that's where Mercury is. And we also found out, of course, that Mercury is in the third house, which is always inauspicious to any Lagna. And there's a mutual yoga going on between the third lord, the sun, and the fourth lord, Mercury. You can see the sun is in Virgo and Mercury is in Leo. Classic mutual yoga between sun and Mercury. Since Mercury is auspicious to the Lagna, but it's in the third house, I would call this overall neutral. Not lending a terrible amount of auspiciousness or ugliness. That's where we are in our series. Now today we're going to be talking about dignity, also called subha. Keep in mind that the actual word subha, it does mean dignity, but usually if you want to get a deep sense of subha, like if you're gonna find it in Kala, you'll look on the Ishtakashta screen and you'll find Subha, but that is the Subha extracted from the Sapta Vargas, which is 7 important Vargas. That's something we get into yoga territory, which in this crash course we're trying to simplify. So for now we're just dealing with dignity of the Rashi chart, the D1. Now, this little description of dignity comes from The Art and Science of Vedic Astrology by Richard Fish and Ryan Kirkzak. That is this book right here. Might as well do a little, oh my gosh, this always happens. I wonder if you guys can, I wonder if it's necessary that you guys, yeah. So sometimes I forget to show you guys, share my screen, but that's okay. Let's call this an intro. The following excerpt comes from Richard Fish and Ryan Kirkzak, The Art and Science of Vedic Astrology. Ryan recommends that we all, in his Asheville Vedic Astrology Apprenticeship Program, he recommends we all get this just to get a starting sense of the foundation of Vedic Astrology. I recommend it because it really cinches everything together. So, this is the page you were supposed to be looking at. This is from The Art and Science of Vedic Astrology by Ryan Kirkzak and Richard Fish. The fivefold relationship between planets, which is called Panchadha Maitri. So what this is about is that any one planet can have one of 5 types of relationship with another planet. And this happens by combining, that's what that word should say, combining 2 sets of relationships. There's permanent relationships and there's temporary relationships. So the planets have a way of relating to each other no matter what the chart. The sun will always have a friendliness to Moon, Mars, and Jupiter. It will always have a natural neutrality with Mercury, and it will always have a harder time in Venus and Saturn ruled signs, or when they're conjunct or what have you. So those are permanent relationships. Because they always apply regardless of the temporary relationships in the chart. In contrast, the varying position of planets to each other in an individual birth chart also gives rise to a set of temporary relationships. What's that all about? Well, planets, so this is the temporal relationships. There's temporary friends and temporary enemies. Planets that are in the 2nd, 3rd, 4th, 10th, 11th, and 12th sign, as counted from the planet under consideration, become temporary friends. Planets in the same sign, or in the 5th, 6th, 7th, 8th, or 9th, as counted from the planet, are considered temporary enemies. What do we mean by this? Just take a look at our chart here. We see that Mercury is where Mercury is, and the Sun is in the second house from Mercury, the second sign from Mercury. That is a temporary friendship, regardless of Mercury and the Sun's natural relationship. And Mercury is in the 12th house from the Sun. That also is a temporary relationship, which is temporary friendly. So these two, no matter what planets they are, would be getting along well together, okay? Venus and Mars here are temporary friends because they're one sign away from each other. They're in the 2nd and 12th from each other. That's always a temporary friendship. Now you have to combine both. Each planet has a permanent and a temporary relationship with every other planet in the chart. So we can kind of see this from the fact that the Sun is neutral to Mercury, but Mercury is friendly to the Sun. So this goes to say, I always confuse these, but what this means to say is that the Sun is a friend of Mercury's, which means Mercury is actually in the sign of a friend by being in Leo. Again, if we go back here, the Sun is friendly to Mercury. So Mercury is in good dignity in Leo, naturally, in a permanent way. And the Sun is neutral by being in Virgo. It doesn't hate it, but it's not its best friend. It just gets along, and it deals with the way of Virgo. Then we add the temporal relationships to this. So when you combine the temporary, and the permanent relationship, you get 5 different types. A permanent enemy, which is also a temporary enemy, becomes a great enemy. A permanent neutral, like the Sun, which is a temporary... Yeah, well, I guess I shouldn't say that. A permanent neutral, which is a temporary enemy, becomes just a regular enemy, right? So let's say the Sun is neutral to Mercury. I wonder if we can even figure something out like this. A permanent neutral to the Sun. I think Mercury is the only neutral. Yes, it is. So that wouldn't really work. Mercury's neutral is Mars, Jupiter, and Saturn. Well, here's a good example. Mercury and Saturn, as we can see from our list, Saturn is neutral to Mercury, right? So that means that Saturn and Mercury they're neutral generally. They don't hate each other, but they don't love each other. Or at least Mercury doesn't hate Saturn, but it doesn't love it either. And in this case, not only is that a permanent neutral, but also Saturn is in what? The 2nd, 3rd, 4th, 5th, 6th, 7th, 8th house from Mercury. And as we can see here, planets in the 8th as counted from the planet under consideration is a temporary enemy. So Saturn is a permanent enemy, which is a temporary Saturn is a permanent neutral to Mercury, but it's a temporary enemy, and thus it just becomes a regular enemy from Mercury's perspective. Which is, that's just what that is. Saturn is that enemy to Saturn in this whole chart, and if there is any aspects to them, which there are, Saturn is going to treat Mercury in an enemy sort of way, which is not the best dignity. A permanent enemy, which is a temporary friend, becomes neutral. A permanent friend, which is a temporary enemy, also becomes neutral. That should say temporary enemy in red. So you guys can see the schema that's going on here. Now, basically, we're going to see what this means, but yeah, this is it here. We'll just say it. This is a perspective on the degree to which a planet can manifest its essential nature due to sign placement. In my own words, this is modified by everything else in our checklist. So, if Mercury is in its fall, its debilitation, then it doesn't matter the relationship it has with that planet. It only gives 12%. If Mercury's in Pisces, even if Mercury and Pisces are temporary friends, it still only gives 12.5%. A planet in an enemy sign gives up to 25%. A planet in a neutral sign gives 37% of its nature and agenda. What this means, what this percent is how much of what is expressed reflects on the essential nature of the planet. Because when a planet can express its regular nature, it doesn't get filtered, it doesn't get lost. It just joyously expresses what it is without complaint, because it's in a field, a sign, that supports and encourages the nature of that sign. The universe conspires to bring out the best in that planet if the planet is in a sign that works well for the planet. And that's what this is telling us here. Mind you, dignity is only just one way. This is one measure. It's an important measure, but it's only one measure. So this is just some examples from Charlie Sheen's chart of what this is all about. Venus is in its own sign. So it attends to 75% of its agenda naturally, because it's whoops. That's supposed to say 87. I don't know why I put 75. That is a typo. But we can see a planet in its own positive sign, an odd-numbered sign, gives up to 87.5% of its agenda. So this Venus being in Libra, that should say 87.5%, which is good stuff. It's a good, huge number. The field does well for Venus here in this chart, which is good because Venus is the fifth lord. Makes sense with Charlie Sheen doing well as the actor that he was. Now the moon is in Sagittarius, and this is ruled by Jupiter. This is just showing an example of what this is about. So the moon is in Sagittarius, ruled by Jupiter, and that's a permanent neutral to the moon. What is that? What's that all about? Well, these are our permanent relationships. We can see that the moon has Jupiter as neutral, which means Jupiter is neutral to the moon. The moon doesn't love Jupiter, but Jupiter doesn't obstruct it like an enemy would. So, not only that, so Jupiter's neutral to the moon regularly. Now, in this particular chart, Jupiter's in the 7th from the moon, and this makes Jupiter a temporary enemy. Therefore, when you combine them together, the moon is in an enemy sign. It attends to 25% of its desired agenda naturally. It's because the moon is in the sign of Sagittarius, which it's already only neutral to, but Jupiter is so far away from the moon that they are on different cosmic spheres. They're so far away from each other that they can't relate to each other. And the moon needs Jupiter in order to express itself. The field of Sagittarius gives the moon a harder time because Jupiter is an enemy in this chart. Jupiter is an enemy to the moon in this chart. Now let's get to the main figures that we're looking at here. Mercury is in the sign of Leo, ruled by the sun, which is a permanent friend of Mercury. That's a good sign, right? Mercury is in the 2nd house from its dispositor, the sun. The dispositor, of course, is the ruler of the sign that the planet's in. So the ruler of the sign that Mercury's in is the sun, and the sun is a permanent friend. Since Mercury's in the 2nd house from the sun, this also makes it a temporary friend, because as we can see, planets that are the 2nd, 3rd, 4th, 10th, 11th, 12th, as counted from the planet, they become temporary friends. So Mercury is a permanent friend and a temporary friend in this chart, making Mercury in the sign of a great friend. Now, this little page doesn't give an extra percent for being in a great friend sign, but there are positive extra benefits that come from that, aside from this little percentile here. It's in the sign of a great friend, which means what it expresses is just very natural to the field that it's in. It's a very good thing for Mercury, you know. Despite the fact that it's the 3rd house from Gemini, Mercury in Leo is still not a bad place to be by dignity, especially the sun being this close to it. But the sun is always close to Mercury, so there's no surprise there. Because the Mercury only ever gets like 1 to 2 signs away from the sun. Although when they're in the same sign together, then they're temporary enemies. Now the sun itself, let's check out. We're always going to be looking at the dignity and health of the sun because the sun is Mercury's dispositor in this chart, which means the sun is a necessary part of Virgo expressing the fourth house characteristics of Mercury. Mercury leans on everything Leo in this chart, including its lord, the sun, of course, because the sun is Leo. Now, the sun is in the sign of Virgo, ruled by Mercury, which is a permanent neutral to the sun, right? When we look up the sun, Mercury is the sun's only neutral. So it's a permanent neutral. The sun is in the 12th house from its dispositor, Mercury. Oh, look, I've got these switched. My bad. Mercury is in the 12th from the sun, and the sun is in the 2nd from Mercury, right? In any case, this makes them temporary friends. So since it's in the sign of a permanent neutral, but a temporary friend, Mercury, the sun is therefore in the sign of friend, and it also attends to 50% of its agenda naturally. So the dignity looks good for both these planets, particularly Mercury. Not a bad place to be. So, what does this mean in terms of how the sun can effectively transmit its nature through its sign of Virgo? Well, what this means is that when the sun does its third house thing, the sun is the lord, it's the ruler of the chart, it's the ruler of the cosmos. It thinks nobly, and it also wants consistent action. The sun is square, and this is why the sun and Mercury are so close, because they're kind of almost like one in a certain sense. The sun needs Mercury in order to stabilize and fortify whatever the sun is trying to express itself through and beam through in everybody's chart. So the sun can effectively transmit its nature in the sign of Virgo. I guess I should say Mercury is neutral to the sun. Mercury is Rajasic. Mercury has a grounded, it's almost like a merchant consciousness. It wants to develop skills for skills' own sake, which is not necessarily the best thing for the sun. The sun doesn't just focus on skills just in order to be useful. That's like a Mercury thing, although this sun kind of does, which is not the best nature for the sun. The sun is better focused on things that will draw out the inspiration of the person from the depths of their spirit, from the depths of what calls to them, what kind of growth they're seeking to experience. So the sun being in Virgo is neutral, but Mercury is close. Mercury is a friend, which means that at least the Mercury in Charlie Sheen's chart is in a close enough proximity without being in the same sign as the sun. This Mercury allows the sun the space it needs and the closeness and understanding of the sun to get the most out of it, which is important for the third house, which is important for Leo, because now the sun can kind of, the way it tries to stabilize Mercury, because the sun is the expressor and stabilizer of Mercury, the sun does so through Virgo, through a friend, and in a way which is conducive to the sun's nature in this case. The Lord of the universe, the noble person, is looking over a mercantile world with skills and hobbies as an actor and can find expression through that in Charlie Sheen's case, with the help of dignity. You know, at some level, right? Even though there are other ills, this is just dignity we're talking about. It shows how complex astrology is. Now, how does that help to express the potentials of Mercury, the chart ruler, which resides in Leo, its house? Well, we've kind of just said that, you know. Mercury, the ruler of the chart, needs Leo. Because Mercury is in Leo, that means Mercury, it's going to do its organizing, its skill setting, its financial awareness, its managerial awareness, its management of its own actions, its embodiment of its conscious plan. It's going to do all these things through the sun, through Leo, which the Mercury actually does well when Mercury is in Leo, just purely by dignity, not considering it the house. You know, the third house is a crappy place for any planet, but outside of that, Mercury does well in Leo because the mercantile ploy of Mercury, the management, the desire to handle responsibilities and tasks and operations, it's being driven by the operative of the highest instincts in the person to evolve, to do well, winning that whole Charlie Sheen thing. Mercury is being driven to be more than just a merchant. It wants a certain type of glory, and it uses its management of its nervous system of Mercury to attain leonine glory, which is good for Mercury in general, but this Mercury in particular, being temporary friends with the sun, this means there's a great friendship happening here. And the fact that Leo is doing well, the fact that the sun has good dignity as being in a friend, helps Mercury to be in a stable thing. Because the sun is finding activities for itself in the sign of a friend. And because of that, Mercury finds meaningful ways to express its energy through the sun. And what does this mean for Mercury's agenda as the fourth lord in the third house? So it's the same kind of thing. This is the way we have to think critically about a chart. All of this is giving us the capacity to talk about Mercury's agenda as the fourth lord. It's expressing itself through the third house, and so are the outer planets and the sun. All of this fourth house energy is expressing itself through Mercury in the third, and the fact that the sun has skills to channel all of this through makes it all much easier for this Bhava Yoga. Just by the nature of the sun in the sign of a friend. Although it's only a friend, the sun has lots of other things that bother it, but just purely on dignity, that's a good thing that the sun does find some skill sets that it can use by being in the sign of a neutral. And also with Mercury expressing itself through Leo, that means that the Mercury has noble ways to express itself, and so do the outer planets, because the sun is well placed. I know it must be frustrating, but this is a mutual yoga, and it is good in a lot of ways, especially by this dignity thing. They are informing each other. And we've just kind of said this, the outer planets are finding stability, and a way to control the chaos of Uranus and to slowly express in a calm way, in a stabilizing way, the truth that the Pluto in this fourth house can find some retribution, can find some worthiness. Because Charlie Sheen might feel at the bottom of their chart that they have no power when it comes to authority or personal authority. Having skills, having noble actions and hobbies and recreational pursuits and interests, being an actor, these help the Pluto mitigate and explore its feeling of being emotionally virile and useless and unable to be stable emotionally, right? So that was a whole lot, but I mean, we have to think about these things in this way. Overall, we could say that the dignity looks positive. I should have made a little video. I'll show it at the end of this, that the dignity for Charlie Sheen so far is looking pretty good in terms of where Mercury is and where its dispositor, the sun, is. Gives them both mutual strength and allows for a lot of positive things. Now we're going to start talking about the little nitty-gritty details that are going to amplify and assuage and move around this sense of dignity and everything else we see here. So, this has been this episode. I hope you guys dug it. I'm Dustin Cormier for How to Rock Astrology. Check us out on our next episode where we are going to be talking about something very important. It can be a little bit of a lengthy discussion, but it's necessary for defining any parameters in a chart. It is the prosperity of the houses, particularly the prosperity of the 4th house, which is where the outer planet's energies are. But we're also looking at the 3rd house, which has the 4th lord in it. Okay? Hope you guys dig. Check out this next screen just to get the grand total so far of the health of Mercury. We're going to keep analyzing this case study in order to talk about the stability and positive behavior of the outer planets in a chart. See you next time.